So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amy Kratchman, and I am a senior research family consultant at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And I'm excited today to talk to you about engaging patients and families as partners in your research. So the learning objectives for today are, we're going to be describing an institution-wide response to the increasing demand for family engagement and research. I'm going to describe the structure and the model that we have here at CHOP. However, as this work continues to expand, there are other institutions that have a similar structure as we do at CHOP. Describing processes of identifying, onboarding, training, and mentoring research family partners. Not only training and mentoring research family partners, but also the researchers. And so the idea is that hopefully you will be able to establish and maintain research partnerships and collaboratively conduct the research together as partners. And then I'm going to provide some examples of family partners, varying levels of engagement in research. We're going to talk through some of them. And then afterwards, I am hoping what we can do is have a discussion around the PEDSnet template that you are all filling out. What I'm going to talk about in this presentation should give you the basics and a lot of the information of what you should be filling into that template, but we're going to walk through this afterwards. So what prompted really this engagement in research? I like to say it really did start way back when President Obama was in office and the Affordable Care Act was first passed. And that legislation came along with funding for a new research funder, so the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, which you're all familiar with. That was originally funded by the Affordable Care Act. And so it was the main point behind this funder, behind PEDSnet, was that they were going to fund studies, research studies that included not only the researchers and the clinicians, but also it needed to include patients, families, other stakeholders. So that could mean community participants, teachers, if it's a study that has to do with the school, and that they all needed to be included. And the beauty of it was in the beginning, when they first rolled out their announcements for these pilot projects, it was a really good understanding. It was a really good, I should say, wake-up moment for a lot of research teams, because when they applied for it, they would receive feedback that maybe they weren't funded because they weren't showing how they were engaging patients and families and other stakeholders in their research. They are still to this day, you have to, everything you do needs to involve your stakeholders, and that's part of what we'll go through in the template. The nice thing about it too is not only was it funded for another 10 years, so we all know now that it's here to stay, but other funders, such as HRQ, NIH, started seeing the benefits of involving patients and families and other stakeholders in the research. And so they all have now, in different ways, but worked in this concept of engagement. And so I sit on an NIH or NIMH review committee, and I'll never forget the very first meeting a few years ago where I had brought up a manual that was in the proposal, and the manual was written by the research team. And I raised my hand, I'm the only lay person in this group, and said, how was this done in partnership with the patients and the families who are actually going to be using this manual? And the looks around the room were really nice to see, because these light bulbs were going off in everybody's head, like, oh yeah, they needed to do that. And so engagement, that was the first time I brought up engagement in one of those meetings. And ever since, I've served on this committee for a few years. Engagement is an important part of the discussion. So there is this heightened demand for patient, family, and other stakeholder partners in research. So we talked about this, that PCORI was reauthorized for another 10 years. So it really did convert a lot of these skeptics. So people were reading around and saying, I don't know if this is going to stick around. If PCORI is not funded again, maybe we don't have to worry about the engagement. But it was reauthorized, and it converted a lot of skeptics to believers. And so I've spoken with many researchers who will say to me, I never bought into this in the beginning, but once I did it, once I got a PCORI grant, I'm never going back. I'm never not including stakeholders because it really changed the outcomes of my research. And now you'll see too, I talked a little bit about how the other funders are really wanting to see engagement, but they also now have their own advisory groups. So the FDA, in fact, was modeled off of PCORI has a patient engagement advisory panel, and actually the template, the rubric, the compensation guidelines that are really good resources for engagement. They were all developed by the Patient Engagement Advisory Panel, lovingly called the PEEP, and the FDA and CMS. They all were able to model after the PEEP meetings. And so now you'll see a lot of these different groups in the FDA, in CMS, a lot of now the public reviewers and NIH, NIMH are other stakeholders, so not just clinicians. So when we talk about engagement in research, what do we mean by that? Well, we mean the meaningful involvement, and I'm going to really get into the meaningful involvement of patients, caregivers, clinicians, and other healthcare stakeholders throughout the entire research process. This includes from planning the study to conducting the study, and as well to disseminating the study results. So while we all think about disseminating your study results in, scientific journals or peer-reviewed journals, how are we going to disseminate these study results so that the general public will be able to benefit from what we found in our study? And it includes key principles of research partnership. And most of these key principles are also very consistent with family-centered care. And since you're all from pediatric institutions, you're familiar with family-centered care. And so it's a lot of the same concepts. And we'll go through them one at a time. But the first is respect. And in the research area, it means that we're going to understand and we're going to value the other team members' skills and expertise. We're going to recognize that it differs from their own. And so each partner is going to make a valuable contribution to the research. It may not be in the clinical form, so it may not be from the clinician or the researcher, but for instance, a parent who is serving as an advisor on a study about sleep, for children's lack of sleep, they will be the expert in experiencing that from a family perspective, and will be able to represent that viewpoint and therefore that expertise on the research team. And so we want to value that. And we also want to agree to disagree. We're not always going to agree, but that conflicts are addressed openly and really resolved respectively. The next is mutual benefit. And it's really important that research partners are going to gain something from their involvement in this partnership. They're going to benefit in different ways. I am a very big believer, as PCORI is, in that they're paid for their time and their contribution. And that's where the compensation framework came out of. But it's very important that if we are recognizing patients, families, and other stakeholders as an important part of the team, that they need to be paid just like we would pay any other consultant who's a part of our team. So if we're paying a statistician for a consultant, we also need to pay the patient or family stakeholder. They're dedicating a lot of time, and as such, they should be paid for it. I'm going to say this up front, you are going to encounter some families who say, I'm just so grateful, I really want to give back, don't worry about compensating me. And in those cases, I usually like to explain to them, to the family stakeholder who I'm going to be working with, that I understand that they want to give back, but that it's really important to acknowledge the role that they have on this team and that role is valued. I've never gotten to the point where I've had somebody say, absolutely not, I can't take it. But if you ever get to that point, what we've often come up with, at least in our plans at CHOP, is if somebody is really insistent that they don't feel comfortable taking the stipend, then they can donate it. So, but a very important concept that I want us to hold on to is that the partners are going to be paid for their time and contributions. They're also going to learn something new. They're going to acquire new skills. Again, there's that feeling satisfaction for having contributed to work that will benefit others. Lots and lots of parents say to me, I want to give back, I want to help others. This is their way to do it, is to utilize their experience and engaging in research to help other families. There's always shared decision making, and so to remember again that the research partner is an important part of that team, and they take an active role in deciding how that partnership works and how the research is done. And we'll go into that a little bit later. But it's also important that we make sure that all research partners understand how they can share their thoughts and opinions with the group. Sometimes they get into meetings and it can be a little intimidating, especially if we're using a lot of research jargon or if we're using a lot of acronyms. So very important to steer clear of those acronyms as much as you can, and really stop throughout the meetings to ensure that there's a common level of understanding. I usually refer to the nodding head syndrome, which is this. And you will often get that from parent stakeholders or patient stakeholders who, when you ask them if they're good with everything, they'll give you the nodding head. But to really check in and make sure that they do understand it, oftentimes in these in a situation where you're afraid to share that maybe you don't understand a few of the concepts that was talked about, to make sure that you're not just getting that nodding head and that they really do understand and can share their thoughts with the group. So you want to, in doing that, you want to make sure they have a clear understanding of the material you're going to cover, and they're going to understand the how and why decisions are made. So even if they give a great suggestion and it's something that can't be done in the study, explaining to them, that's a great suggestion. Here's why we can't do that in the study. And then also keeping them up to date on the study's progress. So, they may be involved in the design phase of the study, and then you're in the phase where you're actively recruiting, and so the stakeholders don't play as much of a role, but keeping them engaged and providing them with updates on the study's progress is very important. Our research family partners at CHOP tell us over and over again how important it is to them to know what's going on with the study, even if they're not meeting as often as they were in the beginning. And it's also important that they're contributing to all phases of the research. So, they can help you identify research questions and decide how the research can be done. They can help you with collecting and using the information to answer research questions, and they can ensure that results are shared in ways that will improve others' lives. And so that goes into a lot of the dissemination, making sure that when when a study is published in a peer-reviewed journal, that there is what I like to call layperson's version, or public abstract, so that people who don't have an advanced degree can understand what this research did, and it can benefit them. Lots of times too that you have a lot of these light bulb moments that we wouldn't have thought of. And so I usually refer to this great example that Chris Forrest, I was involved with one of his earlier PCORI projects, which involved sleep. And it involved patient-centered outcomes for that. And what patients, not only patients, but also what parents thought were important outcomes. And he had two stakeholder groups. Actually, there were probably 4 stakeholder groups, but 2 coming from the patient and the family side. And so he had a stakeholder group of parents who, would talk about their experience with their child's sleep. And there was also a really important stakeholder group of youth, so teenagers, who really contributed to a lot of our understanding of what some of these, questions we were asking people. And so I'll never forget when one of our, actually she was in college at the time, stakeholders said to us, wait a second, the one thing you're all not understanding is you're talking about screen time. The problem with limiting screen time before sleep is that you have to remember that as we're applying to college, we need to make sure that we are staying very active in school, so that we're part of outside, extracurricular activities, so it'll look good when we go to apply for colleges. And we're usually running all around, and then when we finally are able to get home, we need to sit down and do our homework, which, surprise, surprise, is all now being done online. And so it's really hard to be able to say you have to stop your screen time when the only way a student can turn their work in is to do it through the computer. So very important light bulb moment for us as a research team. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do here at CHOP. We have a program, it's called the Research Family Partners Program. It lives in the CHOP Research Institute, and specifically it lives within the Clinical Research Support Office. So it's a service for CHOP researchers to be able to use and to help recruit families to participate in their projects, patients as well. The program also can help a researcher identify, train, and support, most importantly, support these families, and specialized training, which we'll talk about a little bit further down. But the training and the support are really important. It's very important to keep them engaged. And what we found with creating this program was that whereas a team would recruit, say, a parent stakeholder to be part of their research project. But when that research project was done, then where does the family partner, where does the parent go from there? And so the nice part about Research Family Partners is that we have created a home for them where they are able to continue with training, continue with support, and if interested, if a study they're participating on is done, they're able to be matched with another project. So it really gives us a nice pool of patient and parent stakeholders who can really partner with us in all different research projects. So I wanted to just talk briefly about how there's that. We talked about those varying levels of engagement. And probably, so, you can go from the lowest, which is just that you have a stakeholder who's aware that research is being done. I'm in an academic healthcare institution, so research is being done there in a teaching hospital. And then when you kind of move up the ladder of engagement, you get to where, people are interested in becoming participants and contributing to the study. And hold on to that thought for a second, the participant part of it. The next level of engagement is advisors, and they're going to be more of the reactive contributors. And the highest, obviously, is the study team members. So they're going to be active contributors. They're going to be, usually they're co-investigators. They are members of the research team that meets regularly. Now, in going back to, I just wanted to real quick go back to participants and advisors. So advisors are most of the places where you're all going to land with engaging patients and other caregivers, because advisors are going to help you react to different parts of what you're doing throughout the study. So you're never designing something or doing something without them. So a great example about advisors is I work with a kidney stone network who has a wonderful group of patient and family partners. And in the very beginning, it's a comparative effectiveness study that they're doing with different surgical techniques on removing kidney stones. And it was really important for them that when they were deciding on which measures to use for the study, so what did they want to learn from that patient? Did they want to talk about, they want to talk about their quality of life after the surgery? There were all different measures that we had asked our patients and family partners to look at, to say, of all these measures that we're going to ask study participants to complete, which ones do you think you've had this experience? Which ones are most important to patients and families? Which ones are important to you? And that was the team, the patient and family partner team. They really determined what the final measures were that are now being used in the study. And they continue to advise throughout the study process. But it's important that lots of times, this is still, believe it or not, sometimes a new concept, especially to the families, the caregivers, the patients who you're going to be asking. Lots of times when I say, would you like to be a research family partner, people right away think I'm asking them to be a participant in a research study. And so I always really emphasize the fact that this is, you're an advisor, you're an important part of the team, and you will not be a participant in the study. But you'll know that as you move forward, you'll have to educate people on the fact that they're not. This is advising. This is being an active contributor to the team. I talked about a little bit earlier about meaningful engagement. This is something I feel really strongly about. Anybody can really do engagement. We can write up a design for a study, and then we could be most of the way done and take it to the family, our advisory group, and say, what do you think about it? And if we managed to just have them look at it and say, looks great, then that's more of a token partnership. We want the engagement to be real. The partnerships are real. So these are made when people with different skills and expertise work together. But most importantly is that everyone's contribution and feedback is valued. So that goes back to that when I talk about engaging with patients and families, that goes back to that respect. That goes back to the constant information sharing. For instance, that was a really great idea and you brought up a good point. Here's why we can't use that. That's a real partnership. Tokenism, we're asking a few people to join the research team to give the appearance of a real partnership, but token partners are not treated as equal members of the team. And what PCORI and other funding organizations look for are these real partnerships, these meaningful engagements. So just some examples of real versus token in decision making. Real partners have a voice in decisions. They influence the decision of others. Sometimes in tokenism, the partners are asked to give their opinions, but they don't help make any of the decisions. And oftentimes they can be asked for their opinion after a decision has been made. And so they're not really meaningfully engaging in the work. Something else I really want to point out that's important is that you're going to be bringing in caregiver and patient partners. And not everybody, we're all not on the same educational level. So most of your caregivers and your patients didn't go to med school, don't have their PhD. And they, again, going back to that whole using jargon and language, they may not fully understand some of the conversations you're going to be having. I often advise a team, if you have a concept that you're going to be talking about in a research team meeting that you think may be a little bit difficult to understand for that family partner, that it's important to try to send them the material ahead of time, check in with them. I oftentimes, serving as a family partner, would ask for the material ahead of time. If it was, we were going to be discussing something I absolutely did not understand, I would ask to have a pre-teaching session with the project coordinator. So I would make sure that when I was in the meeting, when I was in the research meeting, I was able to understand it, and therefore I was able to meaningfully engage in the conversation. So now we've talked all about engaging patients and families. Well, how do we recruit them? Where can you start? And I talked a little bit about CHOP's research family partner programs, but the suggestions I have here on this slide are going to apply to all of your institutions. And so most pediatric institutions have family and youth advisory councils. Oftentimes the staff people who run those councils are a wealth of knowledge, and they know their families and their patients well. They know who's a really great family partner or a patient partner. So that's always, I always suggest that's a great place to start. Research advisory councils, same thing. You can also go to advocacy organizations. So if your study is diagnostic specific, reaching out to an advocacy organization, oftentimes they'll be able to connect you with a parent or a patient partner. Patient and family experience departments, I say that because sometimes family and youth advisory councils at your institutions are housed within these departments. So oftentimes you'll find them there. And also frontline clinicians. So it is when I am helping a clinician recruit for a study for, say, a very rare condition. And it's something that I really can't go to my research family partners and they wouldn't, since it's a rare diagnosis, I need to find that parent who has experience with that specific diagnosis, which I may not find from my research family partners. So important at that point, when you have that, is that's when you really want to turn to your frontline clinicians. They know their parents, they know their patients best. They work with them day to day, and oftentimes I've gotten the best suggestions of family partners from those frontline clinicians because they know them well. They've had conversations with them, and they know what type of feedback they've given them. So now that we talked about where to go, you may be asking, what are some of the characteristics I'm looking for? So I have, when we do have frontline clinicians recruit, that's the first question they always ask me. Well, who am I looking for? What am I looking for? And there are certain characteristics in a patient or caregiver stakeholder that you want to look for, because you want to remember that every parent, caregiver, patient, everybody's journey is important and important to tell. But the partners who you are looking for, you want them to be able to talk about their journey, but you want them to be able to have these characteristics as they do it. So looking for people who, if you're a frontline clinician, partner with you in the care of your child. They're willing to share their experiences and they're giving constructive feedback. So, if something doesn't go right in their child's care, they're able to have a conversation with you and talk about, instead of how this was so awful, here's what happened and here's how it could have been better. So I always like to use that as an example for constructive feedback. You want them to have good interpersonal skills. Very important, they need to be able to use their experiences to see the big picture and contribute to better outcomes for patients and families. So while everybody's journey is important, they want to be able to you will need them to take that experience and that journey and apply it to the bigger picture in helping other patients and families. And most importantly, you want to make sure that they usually don't dominate a conversation and that they, give others a chance to talk. And, as a frontline clinician, you will also be able to see this, especially when they come in for appointments. You'll be able to determine whether or not that they could be like that. And then once you've identified people, partners, you really want to set expectations. And so when I have a group of clinicians who need to recruit from their patient pool, usually what they do is they'll send out an email, a letter, a flyer to other clinicians in the practice. So not posting it in their practice, but giving it to other providers in the practice so that they can help them recruit from this larger patient pool. Because remember, the frontline clinicians are going to know their patients best. And then in the communication, in terms of, whether you're recruiting that person or whether a frontline clinician team is doing it, you want to include certain information. So you want to tell them up front what the time commitment's going to be, provide a brief explanation of what the group will do. So for instance, they're going to help with quality improvement or research work. Another example goes back to the kidney stone comparative effectiveness study, in that we explained to the patient family partners that they were an important, we needed them to weigh in on what measures that we used when we were talking about good outcomes. And you want to explain who that point person will be that's reaching out to them, and then ask permission to pass along their contact information. This is how we usually work at CHOP. And this is the advantage of being able to utilize your departments within your institutions who work with your patient and family advisory councils, because they're able to then do the ask, or the frontline clinician is able to do the ask, and then you're able to pass it on to the main person in that study. So who's going to be that person who's going to be their point person throughout the study? Could be the project coordinator, the research coordinator. There could be a staff person like me who can be the point person, but just one person that can be their go-to. And also you want to ask them permission to pass along their contact information to the point person so that they can have the connection with them. You want to include information about a stipend, and you want to explain that their expertise is critical to your work. So this is where you're going to talk about how they are truly partners, and you need their voice and to do your work. I usually at this point explain how you can't do this work without them, and that they are partners with you on this team. And then once you have your group of patient and family partners, now what do you do? And we're going to talk about this more as we go through the PCORI template. But some of the things that I like to do are, one is have an orientation meeting so that all of the patient and family partners get to meet each other, as well as meet members of the research teams. We used to do this in person all the time. Now that we live in a virtual world, we've been doing this virtually, and it's been going very well. We want to provide, the PI needs to provide an overview of the study so that they really, even if they were recruited and they found out a little bit about it, you want to really have that come from the primary investigator and come from that perspective to say, here's what the study is about. Again, re-emphasize why they're an important part of the team. And then you want to come up with a plan. And again, this will be in the template, but you want to talk about the number of times that the group's going to meet. You're going to talk about what are the roles and expectations on both sides. So what are the expectations for, say, us as researchers and for you as caregiver partners? You want to also finalize the stipend amount. So talk to them about how much they can expect to receive for their time that they're working on the study. And again, remembering that you want to always be providing them with updates on studies, even when, say, you're not at a point where you need to have a lot of engagement from them at that moment. It's very, very important to keep up that engagement by providing updates on the study, letting them know that they are partners in this. So what's going on? When will we be meeting next? And I really highly recommend that as you, develop you'll be doing it on the template, but on the engagement plans, to make sure that you go through it with your patient and family advisor group. You want to come to an agreement amongst all of you, and that this is the plan that we are all going to agree on, and so that everybody is bought into how they're going to move forward to work on the research project together. So I've given you a lot of information and a lot of background, and now I really, it would be helpful to take a lot of these concepts. Most of these concepts are all going to be in the PCORI template that you all have, and to apply these concepts and put them into the template. Thank you so much for your time.